EWTNnews.com. I'm Teresa Tomeo, and Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders starts now.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
1-833-288-EWTN.
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
1-833-288-3986.
What's stopping?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, welcome again to Call to Communion on this Monday afternoon here on EWTN. This program is just for you if you are a non-Catholic, or maybe you've got a question for a friend of yours who is a non-Catholic and you'd like to get that question answered. That is why we are here. Here's our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Outside North America, please dial 1 and then 205-271-2985. You can also text the letters EWTN to 58177. Wait for our response, which is a quickie, like a little robo response. When you get it, text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may apply. You can also send us an email if you prefer that. ctc@ewtn.com is the address. ctc@ewtn.com. Pedro Quiles, our producer. Matt Kabinski is our phone screener. Rich Jesse handles social media for the program. If you would like to ask a question via YouTube, we're streaming there right now, as are on Facebook. So in either case, you can put your question in the comments box. Rich will see it. He'll shoot it to us, and off we go. I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
I'm very well. How are you, sir?
I'm doing decent, thanks.
Big changes in the life of the church. We had the Holy Father Pope Francis's funeral over the weekend.
Yes,
I don't know if you got to see any of that. It was spectacular.
I spontaneously woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Get out of here, really?
Yes, which I don't. I mean, it happens from time to time, but I hadn't planned on watching any of it because it's 2 o'clock in the morning.
Well, yeah.
Right? But I was like, well, here it is, 2 o'clock in the morning. I might as well tune in. So I tuned in.
And it really was quite the event. And of course, we'll be starting up with the conclave that starts next week. So keep it here on EWTN. We'll keep you posted on exactly what is happening. We're going to lead off with this question. This is a text that came in over the weekend. This is from Luis, who says, the pastor of my parish uses a variation of the Eucharist doxology. Instead of saying through him, with him, etc., he instead says through Christ, with Christ. This has always bothered me. Is this liturgical abuse?
Well, it's liturgically improper. It's the formula is very, very, very simple. You say the black and you do the red in the rubrics, right, in the missal. And when priests decide to ad lib that they can come up with a version that's better than what Holy Mother Church has given us, usually they can't, but it's irrelevant even if they can. You could have Shakespeare himself could be ordained to the sacred priesthood and compose the most beautiful prayer in the English language or Spanish language or whatever you're talking about. But the fact of the matter is that the aesthetic beauty or theologically edifying nature of some priests' improvisation is beside the point. Because when that happens, the lay people are left hanging, right? I mean, when I have been to Masses personally where the priests decide to ad lib the words of the Mass, you sit there, you can't concentrate. You can't actually think about the Mass.
Distracting.
Because okay, he's gone off. Yeah. What's he going to do next? Is he going to flub the consecration? And so you sit there on the edge of your seat, biting your fingernails, wondering what on earth this guy's going to do next. You start paying attention to him and his personality. And it's not about him and his personality, and he's inserting himself here and what he thinks is his own cleverness in place of the wisdom of the church. And it doesn't matter if he's a poetic genius; it's irrelevant. He's putting his own private theological opinions and preferences ahead of the needs of the faithful. Yeah. I have feelings about this, as you may have discerned.
Yes.
Right? Now, do you want to call it abuse? that's a semantic question. I don't know what, if that's the appropriate word or not, but it's clearly wrong. He shouldn't do it. Now, nothing about that particular offense would invalidate the Mass. It's still a valid Mass.
Yeah.
But it's one where the priest has done what he's not supposed to do.
And there it is. Luis, thanks so much for your text. Here's a question now from Dylan. How do we know that the pagans back in the day were truly worshiping statues and not what they represent, as Catholics do?
Oh, yeah, thanks. Well, some were clearly worshiping what it represented. But some clearly were. Today there are occasions when people seem to really invest some sort of supernatural power into the physical object. There was a case not too long ago, a few years ago, where Hindus around the world became really excited that there had allegedly been a miracle from the statues of Ganesha all over the world, and devotees were offering milk to Ganesha statues, and allegedly the statues were drinking the milk, and it became a big internet meme, and they got all kinds of excited about it, right? Were they? But even then, I would question, I'm not a Hindu, but my sense is most Hindus recognize that, the physical piece of stone or wood is not Ganesha, right? It's a representation. Nevertheless, they still ascribe some sort of magical power to the object. But yeah, I don't think that's really what's at issue as to whether or not they think that the object is a representation or the real thing, right? I don't think that's really what's at issue. The issue is what's being represented.
Yeah.
Is it the true God, or is it a false God?
Yeah. So there it is. And thank you so much. Email from Dylan. Glad to get that answered for you today on EWTN's Call to Communion. Would you like to send us an email for a future show? We can handle it. Got a great big mailbag for you. Just send it to ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. On each of our live shows, Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern, we try to tackle a couple of emails, and then once a month or so, we will delve into that mailbag and answer a whole bunch of questions that we just don't have time for on the regular live show. So again, that address, ctc@ewtn.com. In a moment, we're going to get to Paul, who's listening to us in Houston on the great Guadalupe Radio, AM 1430. We'll also bring you up to date on some of the things happening on EWTN. As you may imagine, we've had a lot of special programming over the last couple of days. That is not over. We've got more for you. Keep it right here on EWTN. We'll tell you all about it. All right, back in just a moment with lots more Call to Communion on EWTN.
Join EWTN for the Novena of Masses for Pope Francis from Rome. Tomorrow morning, 11 Eastern, on EWTN Radio Extra.
Father Benedict Rochelle.
There are legitimate differences of opinion in any religion. There are differences of opinion in Catholicism. But in Catholicism, you expect that people will take the teaching of its supreme authority seriously. To go diametrically opposed to those teachings is to not be a Catholic. Someone in the name of Catholicism is sponsoring the destruction of human life, lives of unborn children. And they got the name Catholic on the door. The highest authority in Catholicism and the encyclical Humanae Vitae, Evangelium Vitae, is absolutely clear that no Catholic can support abortion and that Catholics are responsible to take serious action against legalized abortion.
The people you know and trust are on EWTN.
If you have the iHeartRadio app, you can listen to the EWTN Radio live stream. Go to iHeartRadio and search EWTN.
It's Call to Communion on this Monday afternoon here on EWTN. Our phone number, and we do have a couple lines open for you, 833-288-EWTN. If you have a question for Dr. David Anders, 833-288-3986. You know, here on radio and on television, we talk a lot about prayer. We're firm believers in the power of prayer, and EWTN offers a variety of them for all of your spiritual needs. You can find them at EWTN.com/pray. That's EWTN.com/pray. If you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN, beginning with Paul. Paul's in Houston, listening on Guadalupe Radio, AM 1430. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
I had a question of priests having to celebrate Mass every day. I heard they have to celebrate Mass every day, and I realize there's daily Mass, but what if there's two pastors at the church, and do they need to have someone present to observe the Mass? And is that true? What about vacation? Is it necessary they say it on vacation too?
Thanks. I appreciate the question. So there is no canonical obligation for a priest to say Mass daily. They are not obligated by law to say Mass daily. However, most choose to do so because to celebrate the Mass is the greatest privilege of the priest's ordination, and so most of them would be eager to celebrate Mass every day. And when you talk about going on vacation, I have been at things like academic conferences where the priests are not even pastors; they're professors at some Catholic university, and they're saying Mass in their hotel rooms. They will go out of their way to say Mass anywhere they are. Generally speaking, now I have met priests personally who don't do that, who go on vacation and don't say Mass. But that's rare. That's rare. Generally, they consider it a great privilege. Now, can a priest say Mass alone? Does he have to have an audience? He does not have to have an audience. In fact, many priests will say a private Mass if they, they'll sometimes may invite people to join them, but oftentimes they don't, right? If that's not convenient for whatever reason. What if there's more than one priest? Very often, if there's only one Mass scheduled in a parish on a particular day, one of two things would happen. Both priests could concelebrate. That's very common. Or if one has been assigned the duty of saying the public Mass for the people, Father X may go say Mass at the church, and then Father Y may stay back in the chapel of the rectory and say Mass privately.
Paul, thanks so much for your call. That opens up a line for you right now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Adele sent us this email. Adele says, is there anything in the Bible that assures us we will see our loved ones in heaven?
No, to be sure, because we're not assured of any such thing.
Right.
We're not assured of any such thing. We have to die in the state of grace, and our loved ones have to die in the state of grace if we're going to be assured of the next life. And if we don't, and that's not a given.
Yeah.
That's not. Christ said, "Whoever perseveres to the end will be saved." So we got to do the persevering bit, and the loved ones have to do the persevering bit too. Otherwise, we may not see them.
Yes, indeed. Adele, thanks so much for your email. Chris is watching us on YouTube this afternoon. Chris says, it has been written that we will keep our earthly bodies in heaven. Does this mean we will have to eat, drink, go to the bathroom, etc.?
Yeah, so St. Paul gives us the most vivid description of, vivid in a way, of the resurrected body, in that he acknowledges that it is a body, but he says that it differs from this body in quality. And he uses the analogy of the way the flesh of different animal species can be different from one another. Like fish are not like squirrels, right? They both have flesh, but it's fundamentally a different kind of flesh. He says something analogous happens with the resurrected body. It's a body, but it's fundamentally different from the body that we currently have. How different? In what way? Yeah, eye hasn't seen, ear hasn't heard. It hadn't entered into the heart of man what God has in store for those who love him. So don't know. Christ had the glorified body after his resurrection, and he ate fish. He met the disciples at the lakeside and ate some fish with them. So he clearly could eat fish. Did he have to eat fish? Did he like fish? Would it have been better with jalapeno sauce? I don't know. We don't know any of those questions, right? All we know is Christ ate some fish. Could he have gone without eating the fish? There's a lot of imagery in the Old Testament about the coming day of the Lord that gives a lot of sort of vivid physical imagery of, grapes and wine and things flowing with milk and honey and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know about lentils. I don't know if it's flowing with lentils, but I'd kind of like that. But flowing with broccoli, but at least milk and honey. How literally should we take those representations? Now, there were some in Christian antiquity in the 2nd century that took them very seriously and said, oh, yeah, we're going to have all kinds of grapes. It's going to be grapes coming out our eyeballs. We're going to have so many grapes, And then there were other fathers that said, oh, that's way too physicalist, and it's going to be a much more ethereal, spiritual thing. No grapes. Grapes are off. Eye hasn't seen, ear hasn't heard, it hasn't entered into the heart of man what God has in store for those who love him.
I must say the idea of the jalapeno sauce does sound pretty good.
Heavenly jalapeno.
I'm a spicy guy.
Oh,
That's all there is to it. Appreciate that. Thanks so much for your question. Let's go now to John in Baltimore, and it looks like click. There we go. John's listening on Sirius XM channel 130. Hello, John. What's on your mind today?
Hi, guys. I got a real simple question. When going into Mass and using the holy water to renew my baptismal rites, I notice a lot of people will do it as they're leaving. Is that something we shouldn't do, or is that a no-no, or am I just looking at it too directly?
Yeah, so the nice thing about sacramentals is you really can use them as much or as little as you want to, according to your taste.
Okay.
And personally, I think it's a very nice habit to dip your hand in the holy water font every time you pass one, right? I mean, how many times a day do I need to remember my baptism? A lot.
You bet.
And if that helps you do that, then that's a very helpful practice. So, yeah, there's certainly no prohibition. I remember one time I was listening to an instructor who was a Catholic religious, actually, instructing new catechumens in the proper way to receive Holy Communion. And this particular instructor had sort of a bee in the bonnet, so to speak, about people who made the sign of the cross after receiving communion. And this individual pointed out, that's not in the rubrics. That you're not required to do that, so you shouldn't be doing that. And I scratched my head and I thought, well, a lot of things aren't in the rubrics, and rubrics don't tell me specifically to pray a Hail Mary after I receive communion. They don't actually tell me what to do after I receive communion, other than to go back and kneel in my pew, right? What I do in my private interior devotion is up to me.
That's right.
If I want to make the sign of the cross, doggone it, I'm going to make it. And I make it all the time.
Good man.
And same thing with the holy water or whatever else. Whatever helps you in your reflections to unite yourself to Christ and to the mysteries of his passion, death, and resurrection is the right spirituality for you.
All right. John, is that helpful for you, sir?
Yes, very much. Thank you, guys. I love you guys both. Thank you.
Thanks for your call. We appreciate that. Call to communion here on EWTN. We have a couple lines open at the moment, 833-288-EWTN. A great time to call, 833-288-3986. Joe is a first-time caller in Kenosha, listening on Sirius XM, channel 130. Hello, Joe. What's on your mind today, sir?
Hey there. Good afternoon, guys.
Howdy.
Is it afternoon yet? No.
It is. It is.
Say, we hear about incorruptibles. So the individuals where their body or part of their body does not decay after, decades or centuries, I guess. Does that happen in other religions? Are there other faiths besides the Catholic Church where they have incorruptibles?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. So clearly it's part of the Catholic tradition to assign a kind of significance to the incorruptibility of the bodies of some saints. And that's fine. That's fine, and that's useful for private devotion and so forth. But the absence of that says nothing about the individual's sanctity. So, for example, when they dug up Cardinal Newman, during his beatification and canonization process, you know what they found? Nothing. not a femur, not a finger bone.
Really?
Nothing.
Wow.
He had from dust he came and to dust he went. There was nothing but dirt in his coffin. Absolutely nothing. Right. Does that mean that Newman wasn't a saint? No, he's canonized. He's a saint, right? And clearly there are bodies that don't rot for reasons that are non-supernatural. I'm not an Egyptologist, but my understanding is we've pulled quite a few of them out of pyramids.
Yes.
Right? So that the mere fact of not rotting is not an indication of sanctity, nor is the fact of rotting a counterindication of sanctity or an indicator of the lack of sanctity.
Yeah.
So are there non-Catholic bodies that don't rot? Well, to be sure, of course there are, right? More interestingly, are there non-Catholic Christians that might ascribe some spiritual significance to that fact. Well, I imagine the Orthodox would take interest, right? It would not be in the mind of a Protestant to do so. That doesn't sort of jive with their theological system. And there are other traditions that assign miraculous significance to relics, right? So Buddhism actually has quite a lively relic cult going on. Oh, yes. Yes. But as far as incorruption it goes, I don't know much about Buddhist incorruption, but there are definitely relics within that tradition.
Very good. And Joe, thanks so much for your call from Kenosha. Call to communion here on EWTN. Lines are open for you at 833-288-EWTN. Maybe you'd like to share what is stopping you from becoming a Catholic. Always an interesting question. 833-288-3986. Kevin's watching us on YouTube this afternoon. Kevin says, what is Jesus referring to when he says, "It is finished" on the cross?
Yeah, well, clearly Christ offered his life as a sacrifice. He said in the Gospel of Mark he didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So the paying of that ransom was accomplished on the cross. Now, the way Catholics understand the death of Christ is that it is multifaceted. There's several aspects to it. One thing that Christ does by his death is he, as I mentioned, he offers himself out of obedience to the Father, and that's pleasing to God. And the merits of Christ's offering are the basis by which he purchases the rewards of redemption for his church, for all those members of his body. Christ's death also is an example for us, a moral example of constancy and fortitude under persecution and difficulty. And St. Peter says Christ died, leaving us an example that we should do likewise. There's also a good bit in sacred scripture and tradition about Christ's death and resurrection being the defeat of death, the defeat of death, hell, sin, and the devil, a sort of triumphant descent to the dead and then return to life again, and that we are inserted into that through baptism. We partake of that power of his death and resurrection. All of these are aspects of the work of atonement that is essentially culminating on the cross.
Appreciate that, and thank you, Kevin, for watching us this afternoon on YouTube. Here's a question now from Sam. My friend said that the church is anyone and everyone who believes in Christ. Is this true, or is there more to it?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. So the Catholic position is that there is a distinction between being a member of the church and being in communion with the church. And it is possible to have both or to have only one of them.
Okay.
So St. Paul tells us in Galatians chapter 3 that everyone who is baptized has clothed himself with Christ. Everyone who is baptized is a member of Christ's body, right? And so that would include a great number of people who are not Catholics. However, Christ's desire for the members of his body is that they be visibly one in a manner that would be observable to non-believers. That's exactly what he says in John 17. So We're not just talking about some sort of interior spiritual unity. We're talking about a visible unity. It is a criterion that St. Paul brings forward in 1 Corinthians and says, for example, you have to agree on everything, that it's a unity of belief. It's also a unity in morality, that one actually can't show favoritism to one another. One cannot withdraw into sects or groups apart, party spirit, that sort of thing. And so that really cuts against the grain of, say, the ideology of denominationalism, which is all about dividing up into sects and not agreeing with one another, right? Paul says all that's out. We can't do any of that, right? That's wrong. So to be in full communion with the church is to believe all that she teaches, to share with her in her sacraments, and to be submitted to her governmental authority. Clearly not everybody who's baptized does that.
Okay. Appreciate that. And thank you, Sam, for your email. A quick one here as we're going to break. This is from Michael. Looks like a text here. Do aliens exist? And are there other mothers of God in another dimension?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. Do aliens exist? Yes. We know of a few, and we actually know some of their names. Let's see. Gabriel, Michael, Raphael, Lucifer, Beelzebub.
That was too easy.
Yeah. So there are non-human intelligences that are not as such, restricted to planet Earth, and they're the angels.
Sure,
right?
sure.
Are there sort of biological entities that exist off of planet Earth? I have no idea. I don't think anybody has any idea. I mean, what little I know about cosmology suggests that the universe is massive beyond our measly comprehension, and that the odds that there might be life on some distant star, are whatever they are, and I don't know that anybody can calculate those. So it's definitely possible that there's alien life, and maybe even intelligent life.
Okay.
Now, did the second person of the Trinity become incarnate for their salvation? That's a different question, and I'd say that the weight of the evidence would be against that. Because the hypostatic union, the union of the second person of the Trinity with human nature, is everlasting, right? I mean, so Christ is everlastingly our incarnate Lord, and he's not like the incarnate bug-eyed alien, right?
Yeah.
Now, C.S. Lewis has an interesting theory on that, which is that any subsequent intelligent races that evolved or God created would be humanoid. Huh. That's just a speculative theory from his science fiction trilogy. You go read C.S. Lewis, Out of the Silent Planet, That Hideous Strength, and Paralandra.
Sure.
It poses that question. What if God created alien life on other planets?
Stay with us. It is Call to Communion on EWTN.
The month of April holds special significance for Catholics. It's devoted to Jesus in the Holy Eucharist. During this month, we are invited to reflect on the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. St. Padre Pio said, "Always remain close to the Catholic Church, because it alone can give you true peace, since it alone possesses Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament, the true Prince of Peace." Join in this devotion to the Holy Eucharist with books, DVDs, sterling silver medals, rosaries, crucifixes, and more. Available at EWTNRC.com. That's EWTNRC.com.
Hi, we're Greg and Jennifer Willits, founders of RosaryArmy.com.
When Christians pray the Rosary, we repeat many of the prayers.
The Hail Mary is said more than 50 times.
The Our Father is said at least 5 times, along with the Glory Be.
And so obviously there's a whole lot of repetition going on, but that doesn't go against Matthew 6:7 that warns against vain repetition.
With the Rosary and other prayers like the Divine Mercy Chaplet, when done correctly, the prayers are far from being repeated in vain.
Repetition in a meditative sense, with full meaning and focus on Jesus Christ, actually brings us closer to Him and helps us to more fully make the gospel a part of our daily lives.
As our beloved Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI said, the Rosary itself is a biblical meditation that permits us to reflect on the events of the Lord's life in the company of the Blessed Virgin, treasuring them as she did.
So repetition can help us to be more prayerful.
I think you should say that again.
Don't make me repeat myself.
For more information about the Rosary, visit RosaryArmy.com.
Tomorrow on More to Life, the life you were meant to live.
We'll look at how the theology of the body can help you live a more abundant life.
That's tomorrow on More to Life, 10 a.m. Eastern, 9 Central on EWTN Radio.
Now back to Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
Hey, glad you're with us for Call to Communion on this Monday afternoon here on EWTN. Our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. There are lines open for you, 833-288-3986. Congratulations going out to 2 more great EWTN radio partners. KHQR, serving Harlingen, Texas. They are now celebrating 7 years with EWTN. Also, St. Paul Catholic Radio, serving Augusta, Georgia, and McCormick, South Carolina, marking 13 years with us. Congratulations to Michael Schwartz in Texas and John Prohaska in Georgia and South Carolina from your friends here at EWTN. Earlier in the program, we were talking about relics briefly. Vanessa sent us this email. What is the importance of relics, and why do Catholics revere them?
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. St. Gregory of Nyssa once said about Catholic veneration of relics that we are venerating Christ in his members. And that, I think, best encapsulates their significance, that the Catholic doctrine, the biblical doctrine, is that through baptism we become members of Christ. And that's not just a metaphor. That's actually a mystical truth. And this comes out in sacred scripture in a kind of a bizarre passage in 1 Corinthians 6, where Paul warns against prostitution as an activity on the grounds that to do so would be to unite the body of Christ with a prostitute. So since you've been baptized, there's kind of a double reason not to engage in immorality. And that's kind of an arresting way of putting it, but it shows the realism with which Paul took this doctrine, that Christians, by virtue of their baptism, really are truly members of Christ, right? And if they are sanctified, if they've been divinized, which is the end of Christian life, they've become like Christ in their character, they are like other Christs. St. Paul said in 2 Corinthians 5 that we have become Christ's co-laborers as if God were making his appeal through us, right? So the principle of mediation that's supremely visible to us in Jesus is shared with us. It's poured out effusively on the members of his body who become Christ in the world, so to speak. There's that hymn, Christ has no body now but yours, right? To spread the gospel and to do good on the planet, Earth. And so we also believe that these bodies will rise again since they've been united to Jesus. On the last day, Christ's resurrected body is the first fruits of that final redemption, that final resurrection of which we'll all partake. And so the veneration of saints and their relics is a witness and a testimony to all these theological truths, namely that these bodies will rise, that those particular saints are mediators of God's grace, as we all are, but in a more eminent way, that they're intercessors for us in heaven, something we see in Sacred Scripture in Revelation chapter 5. And by focusing the attention on the particular life of an individual saint, not in exclusion to Christ, but because of Christ and through Christ, one can, as it were, have a sense of how the gospel might be lived in a concrete particular circumstance, right? So, I'm not called to be the incarnate Son of God, hypostatically united to the divinity. I'm called to be David in Birmingham, Alabama in the 21st century, right? And so while Christ is universally the model of holiness, it'd be interesting to me to find someone who was, say, a human biological father who could be a model of holiness, somebody who maybe was a radio personality model of holiness, somebody who was engaged in Catholic catechesis as a model of holiness. These are things that I do in my life. And guess what? There are saints that meet all those descriptions. If you're a doctor, find somebody who's a medical person who is a saint. And that way it helps us sort of, in another kind of sense, incarnate the gospel in our particular circumstances. So devotion to saints and their relics is just a delightful aspect of the Catholic devotional experience. It's one of the things that led me to Catholicism, actually, because when I studied the history of the thing, I realized how ubiquitous the practice was in Christian antiquity, that you just couldn't go anywhere in the ancient Christian world and not find devotion to saints and their relics. And I thought, well, if that's the case, which it most clearly is, I can't really claim to be in continuity with the ancient church if I don't do this. If I throw out devotion to saints and the relics, I've really got to throw out ancient Christianity, and then, there goes the claim to be in continuity.
Yeah.
I'm just doing my own thing at that point, not historic Christianity.
Appreciate that question. Vanessa, thank you so much for your email. Back to the phones now at 833-288-EWTN. Here is Jackson in North Texas watching us today on YouTube. Hello, Jackson. What's on your mind today?
Hey, I was wondering how your relationship was with your Protestant family and friends, knowing that being raised in an anti-Catholic background, after you became Catholic, did you have people who burnt bridges on you? Because I'm at a point now where I feel convinced that Catholicism is true, but putting it lightly, I have some relatives who are not very highly esteemed of the Catholic Church.
Sure. Yeah. Well, your question is very pertinent, and of course, most converts who come from your kind of background go through this. I did myself. Did I have anybody that burned bridges? Yes, absolutely, I did. Right, and there, fortunately, no members of my immediate family burned bridges, but I did have some people in my life that burned bridges and wouldn't have anything to do with me after I became Catholic. I have one relative who is no longer a practicing Christian. Was not a practicing Christian at the time I became Catholic. In fact, had become quite anti-Christian, and no longer believed in God, heaven, hell, grace, Christ, the afterlife, any of it. All right, and I mentioned to this individual that I was planning on becoming Catholic, and the person involved sat stunned for a moment and then started to laugh. And I said, "Why are you laughing?" And this person answered, "Well, because of the thought that just went through my head. The thought was, oh no, Dave's going to go to hell. Then I remember that I don't believe in hell." But my point was that this individual's formation in anti-Catholicism had been so deep and so well-rooted that long after the person stopped believing in God and the afterlife, the natural impulse, all Catholics are going to hell, came immediately to the forefront. That's how deeply the anti-Catholicism is rooted in some of the corners down here in the Bible Belt where I live. So that's definitely a thing. So what do you do about it? Well, here's what I would do about it today, and I think I would maybe do things differently than I did. But I handled it okay, but I think I could do even better. Number one, you're really not under any obligation to explain yourself or defend yourself to anybody, right? You're following your conscience. And there are conversations that you're going to have, to be sure, right? One thing that you can ask for is, and I tell this to a lot of people, when Luther got up at the Diet of Worms, Protestants just revere him for this famous comment when he said, my conscience is held captive to the Word of God, and to disobey conscience is neither right nor safe. Therefore, here I stand, and I can do no other. Mm-hmm. And, they love that. Roland Bainton wrote this famous biography of Luther called Here I Stand, And, he was right to follow his conscience. So I say, well, Luther got one thing right there. I think he got a lot of things wrong, but he got one thing right. That's a Catholic principle, right? You have to follow the conscience. Yeah. So you think Luther was right to follow his conscience? Well, sure, of course he was right. Okay, well, would you grant me the dignity of following mine? I'm following conscience here. Now, you may think my conscience is misinformed, and that's fine. But for me to not do this would be to disobey conscience, and what I think would be disobeying God. So can we disagree and still be kind to one another?
It's almost a trick question, because it'll make people go, sure, you can follow your conscience.
Well, what you're going to get is, well, yes, of course, but.
Right.
And then the but comes on.
Yep.
And what I would do today, and I would do, when the but comes, I would just smile. I wouldn't worry so much about defending your particular theological beliefs, because there will come a day when these individuals may be open to hear it.
Sure.
They're not now. And if you get into the defense, what's going to happen is they're going to come with their defense, and you're going to get yourself into an argument, and you're not going to win, right? I mean, you can be right and still not win, right? And you need to win another way, which is you need to win through meekness, through charity, through patience, and you need to be the contradiction to every stereotype they hold about Catholics in the Catholic Church.
Yes.
Right? And so you demonstrate by the power of your life that the things they think about Catholics are not true. You don't tell. It's like a good writer, you show, don't tell. That, in my judgment, is how you do it. Also, you're not obligated to become Catholic in the most obnoxious way possible. As much as I would like you to go, cover the back of your car in EWTN bumper stickers, right? You don't have to get the I poped T-shirt and wear it to the family gathering. You don't have to be that guy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Be like Christ, the smoldering wick he didn't snuff out and the bruised reed he didn't break.
Yeah.
Right. You be that to them, and it's pretty hard to beat up and argue with a guy who's just smiling at you and loving you.
Well, yeah. Jackson, is that helpful for you, sir?
Yeah. I'd like to have to ask another question if you have time.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So, weighing all this in. Given the work of my intellect is basically done at this point, what exactly do I do now?
Yes.
Do I just kind of wait on this, go over it, think about how this is going to impact me, or?
Well, here's what I would do. So for one, I hope that you have begun in some manner to move your prayer life to where you're praying with the church to some extent, right? Maybe that's praying the divine office. Maybe that's learning the rosary or other Catholic devotions. Maybe it's reading the catechism. You're starting to you've done the intellectual work, you've said that, but now you start to try to nourish your interior life in a Catholic way, in a Catholic direction. You might start dipping your toe into the physical architecture of the Catholic Church. I'm talking about the buildings, go in a church building, take holy water, spend time in the chapel, pray in front of the Blessed Sacrament, these kinds of things. Even if you're not at the point of actually joining the church, you just start just start moving in this direction a little bit more, right? Meet Catholic people if you can. Try and get involved in their lives to some extent. Of course, the big step is join an RCIA class, or OCIA sometimes it's called, Order of Christian Initiation for Adults. This is the formal process for becoming Catholic. To go through the process is not to obligate you to become Catholic, right? It's to go into a series of meetings, hear some lectures, have some discussion, engage in some liturgical exercises that are all preparatory for becoming Catholic. But of course, at the end of the day, you don't have to pull the trigger if you're not ready. And so to do that, you make a decision about what parish you might consider joining, right? If you have to be received someplace. You can't just become Catholic. You have to become Catholic at some individual parish. So start looking around your neighborhood, look at the parishes, and you can parish shop a little bit. I mean, most people will just stick with the geographical parish, what's closest to their house. But pastors are different; they have different personalities. Some are very welcoming to converts. Some are like, "Oh yeah, we'll put you on the list." I'd rather go someplace where I feel like I'm welcomed and encouraged. Obviously, if you step in an RCIA class and you get some manifest nonsense that is heretical and not Catholic teaching, you write that one off the list and go to the next one. You know enough to figure that out. And I wish it were the case that all Catholic parishes always taught everything that the Church says, and it is not always the case. It is not. So sometimes you have to be a little bit discerning. I would encourage you to make an appointment with a priest. Could be the pastor of a local parish, could be a religious, that's to say, a monk or a friar or somebody, and sit down and open your heart. And you'll find a really interesting thing, which is, doggone it, I've discovered that Catholic priests are human beings.
How about that? And
that's great. That's really nice. I remember the first time I went to confession, it's not the first time I'd talked to a priest, but I'd only talked to like a couple of them and not that much. I really didn't know much, right? And I was just on the verge of becoming Catholic, and so his pastor told me, well, you need to go to confession before you receive confirmation. I go to confession, and I do my confession, and I had no idea what I was doing, absolutely no idea. And then I was like, wow, I'm in a little dark box with a priest. I've never been this intimate with one before, and there's a question I've always wanted to know, and I feel kind of funny asking, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I was like, okay, can I ask you a question, Father? Yes. You're not married? No. Never going to get married? Nope. Took a vow of celibacy? Yep. How on God's green earth do you pull it off? So I've always wanted to ask a Catholic priest that question. And never asked one. I said, tell me how you do it, right? And I'll never forget his answer. And I thought he was going to say, well, I get up at 4 a.m. and I dip myself in an ice bath and and then I go run 12 miles or something and I pray 17 rosaries every 5 minutes. And I don't know what kind of regime of self-inflicted torture I was expecting. Something along those lines, but he didn't. He kind of just sort of smiled, and I didn't actually see his face, but I could kind of feel the smile on the other side of the screen. And he said, relationship with God. And I went, ooh. There's that. What a good answer. What a good answer. What a good answer.
Excellent. Jackson, what a great phone call that is from you in North Texas. Thanks so much for your call today. Call to Communion here on EWTN. Hey, have you checked out our very wonderful EWTN Podcast Central? It is fantastic. One of those great podcasts is Sunday Catholic Word. Now, if you're not a Bible scholar, the full meaning of the Sunday Mass readings can be sometimes tough to comprehend. That's why Catholic Answers apologist Carlo Broussard created the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. As he unpacks the scripture each week, he'll explain God's Word through clear reasoning so that you can understand and defend the faith. Again, it's called Sunday Catholic Word. You can find it and other faith-filled podcasts at EWTN's Podcast Central. Visit EWTN.com/radio. Once you're there, click on the words Podcast Central. That'll take you right to it. All right, back to the phones now. Here is Dan in New Jersey, listening today on Spotify. Hello, Dan. What's on your mind today, sir?
Hey, guys. Good question. What, does the annulment follow just the person, I guess is my question. Like, say that I got an annulment, but my new wife didn't care about Catholicism and didn't bother to get one from her first marriage, would she need annulment too to get married?
Yes, thank you, because she would. Your ex-wife would not, but your new wife would. And this is the reason, because what the annulment does is it asks the question, were you validly married? The tribunal is looking to answer that question. You had a previous relationship. Was it a valid marriage, yes or no? And if the annulment is granted, a declaration of nullity is granted. That means the tribunal has come to the conclusion that the previous relationship was not a valid marriage. But since your current wife was married to somebody else, then the tribunal would need to know the answer to the question, was that marriage valid? If it was a valid marriage, then you can't be lawfully married to somebody who's already married, right? Yep. Now, take heart. You already said something about your current wife, namely that she didn't care a fig about Catholicism, right? At least at the time of her first marriage, which tilts the balance heavily in the direction of she could not have intended what the Catholic Church means by a valid marriage. Because generally speaking, in today's culture, Protestants and non-Christians alike generally don't mean, when they say, I'm going to get married, they don't mean what the Catholic Church means by that word. Yeah. Right? They keep using that word. They don't know what it means.
I see what you did there. Dan, thanks so much for your call today.
At least we avoided the land war in Asia.
Oh, please. Let's do that every time. Here's a question from Emika watching us on YouTube this afternoon. What role does having faith like a mustard seed and moving mountains with it if we're to surrender to divine providence? It sounds like we can never exercise this kind of faith. We can only trust.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. Well, I'm still waiting for that new Ferrari in my garage. Right? Yeah, I really am.
Yeah.
And I have in the past, before I was Catholic, I spent a couple of years where I attended Pentecostal churches that really maintained a strong conviction that if a person had adequate subjective faith, by which I think they meant a very kind of lively, engaged emotional persuasion, right? That's what they meant by faith. If someone had adequate faith, then they could, at the very least, be assured of, say, physical healing, that they wouldn't be plagued by disease, that they could have solutions to their temporal problems like maybe joblessness or homelessness, or they need a raise or something of that sort. And you've probably encountered in Pentecostalism, there's this thing called the name it and claim it spirituality, which is that if you assert with sufficient rigor this thing that loudly, this thing that you're after, God will concur with you, right? Because you've been united to Him, and there's a whole theology behind it, and you'll get what you're asking for. And the quote unquote evidence that this stuff works, and I put that in quotes because it's spurious evidence. It does not work. Okay, the quote unquote evidence is that the televangelist who's telling you this is rich and healthy. He's rich and healthy because he's been collecting donations from the people he's been selling this stuff to, right? They're still not rich and healthy. Yeah. He's rich and healthy. And he's like, here, look at all my wealth and all the rings I have on my fingers and my 17 airplanes. So I see how well the name it and claim it worked for me. It'll work for you too. Here, send a check, right? But here's the skinny on that. Pentecostals die of the same diseases that kill the rest of us, and at the same rates. They are not actually richer or healthier than non-Pentecostals, those who don't hold to that theology. There is one dimension of human flourishing, however, where there is a difference between Pentecostal Christians and other kinds of Christians.
Yeah.
And it's in the mental health area. And they are more, not less, they are more subject to depression and anxiety.
Wow.
Than the general population. And although the interpretation of data is always kind of tricky, it's intuitively it makes sense to me, because if the essence of psychological health is adaptation, acceptance. And if you live a worldview that tells you that you're not getting what you deserve, and you absolutely can, provided you go through the right ablutions, and then you keep not getting it, well, that's just going to breed frustration.
Sure.
And I knew a woman one time, right? Well, I knew her daughter, who had a kind of pretty severe case of very kind of degenerative diabetes, and she'd lost her eyesight and lost her feet, and it was just a really bad, pitiful shape in a wheelchair. It was awful. But her worst suffering in life was that she was convinced that if only she had adequate faith, then she could, be up playing tennis. And so not only did she have this horrible, debilitating disease, but she blamed herself for it and thought it was an indicative of her own moral failure.
How sad.
So it's a terribly cruel theology, right? So as much as I would like to have faith that could move mustard seeds in the sense that I could, fill my garage with the new Ferrari, although I don't know how I'd pay the property taxes on it, right? But I'd like that new Ferrari, I recognize just psychologically, like that expectation. Not only is it not going to deliver the car, it's going to make me absolutely miserable in life, okay? And so what the Catholic tradition does with this is says, though there is a prayer that God infallibly answers. It is the humble, persevering, faithful prayer for those graces that are necessary for my salvation. That is the prayer that God will never refuse. And St. James says, some of you are not getting what you ask for because you pray with wrong motives, because you want to get what you spend on your pleasures. Well, the opposite of getting what I spend on my pleasures is to basically do what Jesus tells us to do in the Lord's Prayer, which is to seek that God's kingdom come and His will be done, not mine. So the more my will becomes aligned with God's will, the more likely I am to get my prayer answered.
Yes.
And that ultimately converges down to the prayer of the Blessed Virgin Mary, be it done to me according to thy word.
Emeka, thanks for watching us on YouTube this afternoon. We have time for one more call. Here is Dave in Florida, listening on the EWTN app. Dave, what's on your mind today, sir?
Yes, I'm concerned about the difference in the Cardinals' attitude towards the church, the liberals and the conservatives. How's that going to play out during this conclave?
Yeah, of course, we have absolutely no idea. I don't think anybody has any idea how that's going to play out. And I'm not a Vaticanist or a papal watcher or anything of that. So there are people who specialize that, and their prognostications about papal conclaves are usually wrong.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think everybody's kind of missed the last several popes in terms of who was going to come out on top. So, so don't know how it's going to turn out. And look, the conclave is no guarantee that you get a wise and holy pope. No guarantee at all. Right? We've had popes that have been saints. We had 200 years in the late Middle Ages without a single canonized saint in the chair of St. Peter.
Wow.
We had a slew of humdingers. Right? They were playing cards. They were chasing women. They were drinking. They were hanging out in Avignon, wearing fine clothes. They were doing anything other than caring about the needs of the church, right? I mean, and everybody knew it. I mean, it wasn't a big secret, right? But here's the important takeaway. Were there saints in those 200 years? You bet.
Sure were.
Were there Catholics that came to holiness through the sacraments of the church during that period of time? You bet. And so in spite of their best efforts, bad popes don't destroy the church. They can harm her, to be sure. And so we pray for a good, wise, and holy pope, right?
Yes.
But the office as such, the office of the papacy, has basically fulfilled its job description for 2,000 years, which is to be the center of Catholic unity and to hold the church together in its fundamental dogmas, right? Everything beyond that is not guaranteed. Now, we'd like to have good popes with sound policy and wisdom and discernment. No guarantee. And I personally am utterly without anxiety about this. Utterly without anxiety. I hope we get a great holy pope. If we get a humdinger, I mean, I'll be sad for the sake of the church and the scandals, to the world, but it's not going to affect my faith one iota. It won't affect me one iota.
We are still here.
We're still here. We're going to be here, until Jesus comes back, or another 2,000 years, right?
Dave, thanks so much for your call from Florida. Dr. David Anders, thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Tom.
We do this program Monday through Friday right here on EWTN, 2 p.m. Eastern for our live broadcast. Check out the podcast whenever you wish by going to EWTN.com/radio. And then, as we were saying earlier, look for those words, Podcast Central. Click on that, and you're off to the races. On behalf of our fantastic team, I'm Tom Price. Along with Dr. David Anders, we will see you tomorrow. God bless.
Another great podcast on EWTN Podcast Central is the Jimmy Akin Podcast. If you've ever wondered about the mysterious and obscure.com/radio and click on Podcast Central today.